everyone, and welcome to BSidesCharm City Day 1. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on stage speaking for the first time. Even more so, my great friends here to my left and to my right. Our talk today is called Closing the Visibility Gap, Threat Hunting with Hawk in the Microsoft Cloud. My name is John Butler, and I'm an active duty Marine. I've been in the Marine Corps for 20 years now. The majority of my experience has been in cybersecurity. As of late, I'm working as a software developer, and I'm one of the core maintainers and core contributors to the Hawk PowerShell project. Paul?
Morning, I am Paul Navarro. I'm currently a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, retired Marine of 21 years, and I've been friends with these dudes for over 10 years. This is our first time to get to share the stage, so this is pretty exciting for us. Good to see some folks out there, and looking forward to sharing some of this work that we do.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lorenzo, same retired Marine, advanced persistent defender, Hawk developer, as well as forensicator. Happy to be here. For me, myself, some of my other friends here, we kind of cut our teeth from the conference perspective and security conferences with BSidesCharm, DC, Nova, and the others that are out there. So it's a phenomenal grassroots organization, and it's great to see everybody here today. And so with that said, we're going to go ahead and get this kicked off. Just to talk to you a little bit about the agenda, right? So the agenda is I'm going to take you through about the first third of the presentation. Paul's going to take you through the second third, where he's going to pick up with the CISA playbook and walk you through a couple of prerequisites as well as case studies. And then John's going to take you over through the investigation types of Hawk and various artifacts, and as well as a Hawk demo, right? So that's essentially the agenda laid out and kind of who's going to cover what part of the presentation. About Hawk. So essentially, the genesis of Hawk, the intent of Hawk was mainly to collect data. This started, as you can see here on the slide, in about 2018 by a gentleman by the name of Matt Bird. So kind of shout out to Matt Bird, where he kind of recognized that there was a need, a void, kind of a gap to fill at that time with cloud, and where we had individuals, no matter who they were just finding things where something was going on with their tenant, and they had different administrative interfaces, kind of as it was mentioned earlier, I think in one of the questions about a single pane of glass, and we know how difficult that is to achieve. And so what we had is essentially these different administrative interfaces that you had to log into each one of them separately, go run some queries, pull some information down. And so the genesis of Hawk was to help, ease that burden and provide a somewhat automated manner to accomplish those tasks, right? And then essentially bring the data back. So this really wasn't the initial intent or design to, necessarily do threat detection on response, from a tool from that perspective, although you can take the data and then incorporate it into whatever tool, whatever set of processes that you may have. We don't want to necessarily dictate that to you, but we would like to help you automate the pull of that data in a reasonable manner. So that's a little bit about Hawk. Obviously free, open source, right? Everybody likes a good free 99 tool. I think to the keynote speaker when he was talking about having some type of domestic cyber capability that can assist people, this isn't a necessary answer to that, but almost in a genesis of saying, hey, here's something that is low cost to no cost, requires a little bit of knowledge that will help you aid in the fight of getting visibility that you need, whether you're responding to threats or you need to just threat hunt on that data. Initially, also, I just mentioned earlier about in terms of the target audience, right? Initially to small, medium-sized businesses, but it's not precluded. It could be anybody, any business that they want. And then, of course, the adoption. I think because it was one of the early tools out the gate, we've typically had about 85,000 downloads thus far, and as well as a lot of momentum with multiple cybersecurity conferences and courses that are taught where you'll hear about Hawk, whether that is in SANS, whether that is actually Black Hill Security, who's here as a sponsor. They do a phenomenal job with their training and stuff like that. And so you'll hear about different aspects of Hawk brought up in some of that training. The inspiration behind Hawk, as I mentioned here, so we've got an evolving threat landscape. The talk earlier talked about doing some not necessarily evasion, but in terms of handing out lures or detections as a means, right? Because this evolving threat landscape that we have, we've got Gen AI in the scene now, we've had cloud. Prior to that, of course, we all know that we lived a lot of on-prem. But one thing that doesn't stop is just the evolving threat. So with that threat, Hawk is also designed to make an effort to keep up with that threat, and we're going to talk about that as the talk goes on. So next is you have fragmented administrative interfaces. I kind of alluded to some of that earlier, where you have to go to 3 different interfaces just to kind of pull some data, and Hawk helps you achieve that as well. And then next is cost constraints, right? To where, again, we realize that commercial tools can be cost prohibitive for certain organizations, whether they're nonprofit, whether they're education, what have you. And so we want to provide something that is useful to people there in terms of the community. Next, of course, is a lack of unified visibility. And I think this is something that is going to be a moving target as we continue on with respect to that visibility. As I work in doing cloud security, just through my time in cloud security as well as information security, I have seen a number of improvements within, whether we're talking tables, whether we're talking different types of telemetry from various parts of the network, whether it's endpoint, what have you, cloud, all that continues to evolve and change. And with that, cloud or any tool that we have has to do the same. And so we are very conscious about that, and we've made efforts to keep up with that as well. Next, what I'll do is I just want to kind of hit this bottom line up front, if you will, here. That I think does a pretty good job, right, where it says, as cloud environments grow more complex, organizations struggle to efficiently gather and analyze critical security data without significant time and cost and investment. And anybody, if they deal with threat hunting, if they deal with incident response, you know that the cost of time and complexity is a big deal. And so kind of to borrow a quote from Tony Robbins, complexity is the enemy of execution. And anytime you're involved in an incident response or anything like that, it's really about executing as fast as you can and kind of closing that loop as you observe, orient, and decide and act. So next what I'll do is just talk to you a little bit about kind of our log sources that Hawk utilizes, right? Prior to, it utilized REST APIs from MS Online as well as Azure Active Directory, which is now known as Entra ID. Those were REST API endpoints, and those endpoints were actually deprecated within as of March 30, 2024. So roughly about a year now that those endpoints have been deprecated and then now pretty much ceased to work. So again, that means that any tool that seeks to get those, to reach out to those interfaces and pull that data back in a meaningful way has to, right, refactor their code. They have to update and modernize their code and their tool to maintain and keep up with a pace that we have with the change that I kind of alluded to earlier. So in this case, what we use Microsoft Graph, which acts as a single REST API endpoint, very powerful, allows you to pull back various telemetry as it relates to Entra ID, as it relates to Teams, Outlook, Intune, and then of course, as I kind of put up there, about 70 different types of resources where you can go and pull down and you can search, query, and analyze resources as this pertains to the Microsoft Cloud, which we call Azure. Next that we use in Hawk that you'll see is the Exchange Online PowerShell module, and that module allows us essentially as a service that enables us to pull back meaningful information from M365 from the CLI, and in this case we use it for the unified audit log to pull back that data again in a manner of which we want to, whether you want to correlate that data, send that data elsewhere, right? So essentially Microsoft Graph and the Exchange Online. And here's just a real brief example of that. So next, as I mentioned, right, that covers kind of the first third of this talk and this presentation. And then what I'm going to do now is pass it over to Paul Navarro. He's going to talk to you about a couple of scenarios that he used with Hawk and how it was operationalized in incident response. And he will talk to you a bit about some of the efforts that was teamed up with CISA and Microsoft to bring about new telemetry. Paul?
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Yeah, so as Lorenzo mentioned, the threat landscape is constantly changing. And so there's every day in the news, I think we're kind of desensitized to the fact that the threat actors are doing things and we're all being, things are being compromised. We're just like, oh, another hack, another day, we kind of move on. And a couple of years ago, there was a few situations I won't dive into where basically it led to a partnership between CISA and Microsoft to create what they've called the Advanced Logging Playbook. And you can use that QR code if you trust me. It'll actually take you to the playbook. I'm going to briefly describe. I think that playbook's about 26, 30 pages long. I wanted to give a couple shout outs though for folks that actually worked on that. I got one of my friends, Alicia, here somewhere. She helped work on that, and my buddy Casey also worked on that as well. So there's a great partnership that put out a lot of great knowledge for basically the community and for customers of M365 and Azure. A couple things that I want to highlight in that playbook that I think is very, very important. It is the availability of premium logs bumped down to the standard logging licensing tier. That's important because at one point in time, Microsoft was basically shutting out visibility depending on licensing, and that is no longer the case. They chose to extend the logs from 90 days to 180 in that lower licensing, and in the higher licensing, you can retain logs up to 365 days. That logging retention and enablement was completed this last June of 2024. Now, there are some gotchas, which I want to make sure that if you trust me to hit the QR code, there's some gotchas. So you have to actually enable some of these logs explicitly for users. So as you go through that playbook, it outlines very detailed of what the logs are, how to enable them, and actually do some testing to ensure that you actually see them correctly inside of your environment. And there's a couple from a broader auditing enablement perspective. This is something that was very frustrating in the past. Is you have to, for the all-up auditing to be enabled from your tenant, there's a few types of licensing levels you have to enable explicitly as well. So I highly recommend if you're in a M365 Enter ID environment to check out this playbook, read all the details, read the why, and the actual technical details to enable those logs. I'm going to go over a couple of the log types because this is very relevant to the so what behind that playbook. One of the log types that was new that Microsoft made available in M365 was the search query initiated in Exchange. This log type provides an actual log entry in the unified audit log that says, hey, someone is querying in Exchange. So if you go into Exchange Online, and I go to the top where you say search, and I search for the word password, or I search for the word direct deposit, or I search for any type of word, that will actually generate a log now when previously it did not. And so very, very helpful. So if you're not collecting that log and it's not enabled for your users, read the playbook and actually enable that as best you can. Second one is SharePoint. Same concept. If you go into SharePoint, which some people here are going to have different opinions about SharePoint, but nonetheless, it still exists. And at the top, you can query and kind of find files and do all the things and whatever. That is also a post-exploitation opportunity for if you compromise an M365 environment or SharePoint Online and present, you can basically run a query across all that environment for things relevant to yourself, in this particular scenario, the threat actor. So again, that log also has to be manually enabled for a user. Next one is mail items accessed. Very frustrating when early on the days doing M365 incident response and threat hunting, this log did not exist. And so by definition, this is what's fascinating if you kind of go back to the SolarWinds post-exploitation from a few years ago. There was the assumption that if the threat actor was in your mailbox, that the email was read. And they were like, well, Paul, how do you know if it's exfiltrated if you can't see the log? By definition, if the mail was accessed and read, it is exfiltrated. I could have taken a picture of it. I could do all kinds of crazy stuff. So just understanding that now that you can see when that mail item access has been accessed, by definition read and by definition exfiltrated, that log now currently exists. The next log that's very, very important is the send log. The fields that will be present in there is who it got sent to and who sent it. It's very important from a post-exploitation of if I compromise someone's mailbox and try to pivot and send mail to somebody else, as I'm following the breadcrumbs, you will be able to follow those breadcrumbs, which are very, very helpful in today's investigations and incident response. The last one's Teams logs. Again, Teams is complicated and weird. We have operationalized all four of those top ones, which John will go here in a second. The Teams ones we haven't yet operationalized yet for the simple fact that it's very, very noisy and a lot of things happening. But there is some TTPs that could be leveraged in Teams, and understanding that those logs are present is, I think, very, very important for this crowd. I'm only going to do a couple case studies. I can sit here all day and everyone, talk about all kinds of cool like hacks and whatnot. The reason why I'm bringing these two up are very, very important. Mr. Coker this morning was mentioning that, the threat actors are basically, for all intents and purposes, in our business every day at every level of organizations, all the way down, all the way up for government, big companies, and obviously small organizations. These two use cases where I used Hawk and some other PowerShell tools was very, very, I think, very relevant to this community, and I think for broader why we maintain Hawk today. I did an incident response or a threat hunting engagement where there was a cheese plant or dairy farm, and they happened to make cheese. They had one IT person on staff. This particular organization did use SharePoint Online. This was prior to those current logs that I mentioned earlier being present. We did some investigation, and we learned that there was a compromised user, and in the post-exploitation, they were basically going through SharePoint, and we could see files downloaded. But when we traversed it, we kind of saw like, well, why are they downloading these files? And so after obviously some little conversation with the owners, they were like, oh, that's where our recipes are. Now, this particular scenario, I will share, it was a nation state, which was fascinating after Mr. Coker's conversation this morning, that there was a nation state stealing actually recipes from this dairy organization. And you're like, why would, and the reason why I use this one all the time is I think it's funny because you get to say, hey, I got to steal the cheese. But but it was really fascinating because they were really curious. I'm like, hey, Paul, why would someone want to steal my recipes? And the premise there is if I steal your recipe, I don't have to create it myself. And so that's where I think Mr. Coker was hitting on this morning, was where the fact that everybody's susceptible for, whether it's, corporate espionage or whatever. And this organization had one IT person with very little knowledge of PowerShell, but was able to log in, and I was able to walk them through to use Hawk, which I thought was very, very important. And they felt empowered at the time to, hey, now I have a tool that I can use in my environment with 150 users to detect and hopefully protect and detect my organization. So that's use case one. Second one, similar in nature, a nonprofit organization, medical facility. They could not enable MFA on their M365 accounts. Everyone here's gonna be like, oh my God, they're terrible IT people and they're a bad organization. Here's why. When you're a nonprofit organization doing medical type of things and you have an employee staff that only has flip phones and they don't have the cool MS Authenticator or the Google app Authenticator, they weren't able to fully enable MFA for these users because some didn't even have phones. And so when you're a nonprofit, you don't have the ability to start handing out iPhones and teaching everybody to use Apple, the Authenticator. So what they did was they had a post-exploitation of one of their financial HR people, and they created the threat actor created a mailbox rule where it's basically filtering for anything the word would direct deposit. And what they did, I assumed it was automation. That was a hypothesis that I had, but they basically defaulted to a known mailbox in Outlook called RSS feeds. So basically what it would do is if that individual received any mail that had the word direct deposit in it, then it would automatically be read without the user seeing it. It would go into the RSS feeds. Threat actor was able to see it and get the things. What they were doing was they were sending emails to all these employees saying, hey, you need to update your direct deposit information, send it to me, blah, blah, blah. And it would forward back to the HR person, and then they were basically compromising direct deposit information. So the two examples I wanted to make sure that I kind of highlighted is, hey, I'm not talking about like, oh, I went into Walmart and I showed them how to use this tool. That is not the type of organization that's using this tool. It is the other constituency that I call it that need to protect and detect against, criminals, nation states, and people that are genuinely being attacked, as Mr. Coker mentioned this morning. Prerequisites for Hawk. This is important, not because I want to say, hey, this is like just what you need to do. This is more importantly to understand like the barrier of entry to use this is very, very small. When the inception of the graph kind of made it slightly more complex because you actually had to do some consenting for PowerShell to access the graph. But nonetheless, if you can run a little bit of PowerShell, if you can install a module on an endpoint, if you have a Windows machine that has PowerShell 5.0 and above on it, you can run Hawk. And if you have a little bit of support from your administrative team that actually give you the permissions to run it. And John will show the website here in a minute of what permissions and how to run it. We've done the best, we think, with the best we can to provide step-by-step instructions, videos, anything that you do to run this. And if you have organizations or people that are getting into this type of work, this is a great place to start. Mr. Butler.
All right, thanks, Paul. All right, so when it comes to running Hawk, there's a few different investigation types that you can utilize when running the application. The first one being a tenant investigation, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is going to pull down logs across your entire tenant to identify any sort of organizational-wide risks and changes. We mentioned this as being looking a mile wide and an inch deep. To run a tenant investigation, once you have Hawk installed, you just simply type in start Hawk tenant investigation. The next investigation type is a user investigation. This is typically ran after a tenant investigation because after a tenant investigation, you might find some users of interest, or you may have had another security product that flagged a user account as being compromised or having some abnormalities with it, and this is where you would run a user investigation. You can run it against either a single user or a list of users, a set of users, and this is going to collect a different set of logs than what is collected in your tenant investigation, specifically for those user accounts. And the command to run this is quite simple as well. It's start Hawk user investigation. And then with each of these investigations, when you're running your tenant investigation, when you're running your user investigation, it's going to run a series of functions sequentially, either tenant-wide functions or user-wide or user functions. If you don't feel like running a full-fledged tenant investigation or a full-fledged user investigation, you can also run each of the individual functions inside of Hawk as well. So if you have some targeted collection needs, or you want to customize something yourself, you can go ahead and do that with each of the individual functions. We have comprehensive help using the get help function name, and we have all these functions listed on our website as well and their purpose. Now, once a tenant investigation is complete, there's going to be a number of artifacts that are dropped to disk, the directory that you specify, and we're going to go over some of those now. It's not the all-inclusive list, but again, the all-inclusive list is on our website, but we'll highlight some of the more important ones, I think, here. So getting pulled from Enter ID is the Enter ID audit log, and the audit log for Enter ID is kind of what it sounds like. It's going to show you all the logs for all the things that are happening inside of Enter ID. So the creation of users, the deletion of users, MFA actions, key signing activities, key rotation activities, whatever you'll find in that Enter ID log is going to be in the audit log. We're also pulling down app consent grants. So for those of you familiar with Entra, inside of Entra, there are enterprise applications. You can also create your own custom applications and assign those applications specific permissions or grants. With Hawk, we're pulling all of those applications from your tenant down to disk, and then we're also looking at all the assigned permissions to those applications and also doing some limited investigative analysis to flag some permissions that might be deemed as high risk, extremely dangerous, or overly permissive for that one there. And then app consent grants, attackers will like to utilize this legitimate function to sometimes they'll gain access to a network, gain access to some credentials, modify a legitimate application to give it some excessive permissions to perform some follow-on actions that they desire. Or they may also register a illegitimate application, a malicious application without your knowledge, and then also give that some permissions as well that you're unaware of. So this is a quick and easy look at this. This is actually a post, so for the SolarWinds compromise, some of the end users of SolarWinds that were then compromised as a follow-on action to the SolarWinds compromise. Some of these organizations that were using SolarWinds that were then hacked after the fact, the threat actors went into those organizations, they obtained administrative privileges, they then modified some previously existing apps within Enter ID, giving it mail.read privileges, and then from there, having mail.read, the attackers were able to monitor emails ingoing and outgoing throughout the entire organization, which is pretty good technique. We're also pulling back risk detections and risky users from Enter ID. So those that are not familiar, risk detections is a log that's maintained in Enter ID. Microsoft is using some analytics, some machine learning to identify risk detections. And examples of risk detections for identities could be, let's say, assigning activity for impossible travel. Impossible travel meaning a user has logged in, let's say, from North Carolina and Seattle at the same time. That's very unlikely that somebody could be doing that legitimately at the same time. So that's something that is an example of a risk detection, or compromised credentials is another risk detection. Risky users is an aggregation of those risk detections that will identify users within your organization that might be considered at risk. So for example, if Paul had 5 medium risk detections on his account in the last 24 hours, he might be flagged as a risky user inside the risky users log. We're also pulling down a complete user account inventory as well for those of you that would like to do a inventory of all your users across your organization. On the M365 side of the house, again, this is not the all-inclusive list. We're pulling back inbox rules. So when you're running the tenant investigation, It is only pulling inbox rules for your admin account specifically. It's not every single user across the entire organization, because that's pretty noisy. But we're pulling inbox rules for Outlook, for inbox rules that are created, inbox rules that are modified, inbox rules that are deleted, so you can catch those things like Paul was talking about with the cheese plant there. We're also pulling back eDiscovery assignments. So eDiscovery are a set of permissions within the Microsoft Cloud that are typically used for legal investigations, legal reviews, and security investigations. And this gives someone the ability, if assigned these eDiscovery rights, to bulk export emails across the organization, to do deep content searches for specific emails. We're pulling those back as well so you can understand which users in your organization are assigned those rights, and then do a little look there to see if those are actually legitimate rights or if those users should actually have those assignments. We're also looking at all admin RBAC changes across all of M365 as well, and kind of highlighting those in some of our logs we're pulling back. And then as you can see here, we have a number of M365 tenant configurations that get pulled down in one nice fell swoop as well, from your admin audit log to transport rules and user account inventories. Now, same thing with your user investigation. There's going to be a whole other set of artifacts that are pulled down for your users that you're investigating. The first one from Enter ID is your Enter ID sign-in log. That's pulled down for that specific user you're looking at. We're also pulling back a number of user configs for that user as well: mailbox info, mailbox stats, folder statistics, and cast mailbox info. On the M365 side of the house, the log specifically, now we're pulling down user inbox rules specifically for that user you're investigating, not every single admin account. Also, auto reply forwarding rules, the sign-in log specifically for M365 and UAL, separated from Enter ID. And then, as Paul mentioned, we're also now pulling down mail items access, Exchange, and SharePoint queries, as well as send mail, which is not listed here. And then also all mobile devices that are registered for that particular user. Now, when it comes to running Hawk, there are two different modes that you can run. The first one being interactive mode, and this is the mode that has always existed up until 4.0. It still exists, but we do have another one. So interactive mode is exactly what it sounds like. You press enter to run your investigation, and it's going to prompt you for a series of information: your output directory, your start date for your investigation, your end date, provides real-time updates to you. And this is great for ad hoc investigations, or if it's your first time using the tool, or you're not comfortable using it in other ways, or if you're just trying to learn the tool. The next one, which we added with the latest release, 4.0, is non-interactive mode, which is what it sounds like. It now allows you to specify command line arguments, which is suitable for scheduled tasks, automation, or if you want to integrate this with other security tools as well. All right, so at this point in time, we're going to just step into the demo. We pre-recorded this, again, as the previous speaker has said, to avoid the wrath of the demo gods. We're going to just show you the pre-recording, because we don't trust the internet here or APIs being up all the time. All right, so for the first part of this demo here, we're going to run a tenant investigation. Tenant investigation in interactive mode. First thing you'll see here is some beautiful ASCII art in our latest update as well, and then it's asking the user for their output directory. Here we're going to specify C:\\BSides_demo. And the next thing Hawk will do is connect to the Microsoft Graph, so we can pull those logs from the Graph API. We'll go ahead and select our account. And the next thing it's going to do is create a subfolder here, and the naming structure for the subfolder is the one you specified here, Hawk _ your tenant name, and then the date timestamp as well. Hawk's then going to check to see if you have the latest version of Hawk installed, which we do, 4.0. If you don't, it's going to ask you if you'd like to upgrade. So here we have it installed. Next, Hawk is going to do a nice little check here to see what sort of M365 license you have, because Paul mentioned before, if you have E5, it's 365 days. If you have a 3 Series license, it's 180 days. And this helps you answer the next question down here below. How far back in time would you like to go to start your investigation? You can enter that in a month, day, year time format, or you can enter that in a number of days. The default is 90 days if you were to enter. Here in the demo, we're going to just type in 120 days and enter here. And then it's going to ask you for the end date as well. Again, same time format. If you press enter, it's going to default to today's date, which is what we do. And the next thing it's going to do is now ask to connect to Exchange Online, so we can pull the logs from M365. It will also show you your configuration summary here, letting you know what version of Hawk you have installed, the file path for your logs, your start date, end date, and then the tenant that you're hunting against. And we also threw in this eagle because we couldn't find a hawk, but it works. It's a bird. It's a bird. All right, so I'm going to skip fast forward here, that yellow text means you're connected to Exchange Online. And then Hawk is kind of off to the races here, running each of the tenant level functions in sequence here. I'm going to pause it real quick just to highlight something here real quick. So we call these things here prompt tags, action, info, and investigate. Action is what it sounds like if an action is occurring. Info, if there's an informational, so like something being complete. And one of the more important ones here is the investigate prompt tag. So the main purpose of Hawk is, again, to automate the collection of logs from the Microsoft Cloud, but there's also some what we call investigative signals or investigative analytics that we're running against some of these logs as well, and those will be displayed to you with the investigate tag. This does not mean that you are compromised necessarily. This is just something that may warrant a closer look once those logs get pulled down. So that's just something to point out there specifically. Also, there's a lot of text wrapping happening here, but this is size 24 font that we use for the demo. So it'll look a little cleaner, hopefully, if you're running it not in size 24. All right. So we're going to skip forward a little bit here just to save some time. And at the end of your investigation, Hawk will provide you with your investigation summary, how long it took, your tenant, again, the directory that you hunted against. And this is a pretty quick run because this is in a lab test environment, so this is much quicker than some larger organizations. And now during the next part of the demo here, we're going to just quickly run a user investigation, but this time we're going to run a user investigation in non-interactive mode. So I'm going to skip forward just a bit. And just to quickly explain the arguments here, you have the user principal name, which is the user that you're hunting against, which in this case is myself. Days to look back is set to 90, the file path, and then also we're specifying the skip update argument so you're able to not be prompted to update Hawk. All right, and then same thing with your tenant investigation. It'll give you your runtime summary there as well, just for a quick view. Now that that's complete, we're going to go ahead and pull up some logs that I already saved to disk here. And this is the directory that Hawk went ahead and created for us. And what you'll notice here in the root investigation directory are 2 text files and 2 folders. So the first text file is hawk.txt, and this is just a copy of all the logs that are being printed to your screen here, so you can go back in time and reference these after the fact. We also have this investigate.txt file, and this is anytime that the investigate prompt pops up, it's going to be saved here in this separate file as well. These are going to be some of the more interesting areas to look at. And then you'll notice this tenant folder. This tenant folder is where all of your tenant logs are saved to for your tenant investigation. And then for each and every user that you conduct a hunt against, Hawk is going to create an individual user directory for that user also. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the user directory here first. Let me go and hide this. So you'll notice a lot of logs here. There's a lot. And to talk about the file formats here, so the majority of the logs that we're pulling back are going to be in a JSON format. So we're saving those to disk as is. And JSON is nice, right? Because if you don't want to just look at a bunch of CSV files, you can take those JSON files, throw them into your SIEM of choice, Elk, Splunk, Sentinel, whatever you have at your disposal. So that's what the JSON is really there for. We also create a CSV representation of all these JSON files as well. And that's a nice quick triage, quick initial glance for a user. If somebody's not as sophisticated or doesn't really know how to use a SIEM or doesn't have that use case, there are individual CSV files there. And there are some text files that are pulled back as well that are your configuration files across your organization. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the mail items access log here real quick. Again, one of the new logs from the CISA playbook. We'll look at this in JSON. We'll look at the first 2 in JSON, then we'll look at the last one in CSV. I'm going to just highlight some of the more important fields here within this log. So creation time, of course, that's always a good field to look at when you're talking about incident response and security events. When was this log created? The unique ID for that log. We have our operation, which is mail items accessed. And then scrolling on down here, of course, another useful one is your client IP address, as well as your client info string. The client info string is going to let you know where the user, what application the user was using at the time to log in and check these mail items. So in this case, Outlook Web, it could be a desktop application or a mobile application, depending on where you're logging in from. Another very useful one, if I do a Control F here, is the session ID. So the session ID is very useful because this ID is present in the mail items access log, but it's also present in multiple other log types across the Microsoft Cloud. And this allows you to correlate actions from one event in one log to another event in other logs. And this session ID is associated with your Entra ID authentication token. So as long as that exists, the session ID will exist for this particular log. That's typically up to 1 hour. However, if you're using refresh tokens, that could be, I think, up to 90 days for your session IDs. If I'm wrong, please correct me afterwards. All right. And then another interesting one here, useful one, is the operation account. How many mail items were accessed is what's indicated here. So here we have 4 mail items that were accessed. And if you want to see which ones are specifically accessed, it's these 4 to the right here under folders, folder items. You have these 4 items here that were accessed. Now you're like, what the hell am I looking at? So there's not going to be the content of the email. You're not going to have the subject line for the email. But what you will have is the internet message ID, which is a unique ID associated with that email. Using that internet message ID, you can then look into Purview. You can then look into utilizing the graph to pull down the full contents of that email if you so desire. I'm not plugged in. What's going on here? All right.
I think you should be good. I'll go ahead and take a look at it.
Okay.
I'll take a look.
Oh, we're good now. Okay. Apologies there. All right.
Power gods.
Power gods. Power gods got me. All right, so the next one we'll look at is the SharePoint searches. This one's a less verbose. There's not as many fields here, but a very, very important log type. So here it gives you the query source, which is SharePoint, the query text. So this user here was looking for password. The scenario name is where they were searching from. So here, SP Home Web is the SharePoint homepage. This could also be a number of other values, such as mobile or Teams. There's a number of other values there that could be set for the scenario name. The user agent string, where the browser the user is using, the user ID, of course, the client ID, and then as well as the creation time are also all very useful pieces of information to look at there. You can see another user was looking for admin password, so we'll go ahead and get out of here. And now we're going to go back up to the tenant folder and take a look at the consent grant logs here. We'll take a look at this in CSV format. Go ahead and expand all of this. Now, some of the more useful columns in here or fields to look at within your app consent grants are the client display name, that is the name of the application within Entry ID itself. Here we have a Hawk test app that was supposed to be deleted in February, and then still exists. And assigned to that, right, one of the useful pieces of information here is the permissions that are assigned to that application. So that Hawk app has a number of permissions here assigned to it. And what Hawk's going to do on the right-hand side here is then categorize the risk associated with those permissions, the assumed risk with those permissions. So this could be considered extremely dangerous, this app.role assignments, because this allows the application to now assign roles to applications across your entire organization, which could allow for privilege escalations and other nefarious acts there. You have another interesting one here, high risk, at high risk, which is your BitLocker key.read.all. This allows the user using this application to now read all of your BitLocker keys. If they have access to your BitLocker keys, they can then decrypt anything that you use to encrypt with those particular keys. The ability to read read and write to all your chats. So that's the consent grants there. It also gives you, what kind of permission types are those applications assigned with, delegated, which is meaning it requires a user's consent to assign those permissions to that app, or assigning it directly to the app with the application permissions here. All right. So that's it for the logs there. We're going to swing back to the slideshow here. Now, looking forward, what does the future have in store for Hawk? First and foremost, we look to expand the Hawk developer community. So if there's anybody here that would love to contribute to the project, go ahead and submit a pull request. We'll show you the GitHub repo here shortly. If you want to even contribute to the web front end, we do have a web front end. The more the merrier. This is an open source project, so we'd love to have you come and join us. With that, we plan to continue to enhance Hawk. If you're a Hawk user today, or if you're a Hawk user tomorrow, and you identify some feature requests or some bug fixes that need to be taken care of, go ahead and submit an issue, and we, again, plan to make this a better tool than what it is today. Lastly, we're establishing a Hawk supporting project known as Hawkeye. The purpose of this project is to help automate some of the log ingestion of the JSON logs into Elk, which is an open source theme, and then with that, then develop some advanced analytics, dashboards, more on the Elk side to provide it over on a SIEM area or SIEM application. And then most importantly, plan to continue to empower small to medium businesses with enhanced, cost-effective Microsoft Cloud visibility and security. If you'd like to learn more about Hawk, go ahead and check out our website. This QR code will take you there as well. I'll give people a second to scan that if they'd like, or take a picture. I'll switch over to that real quick. This is the website here. This all got released with 4.0. We wanted to really revamp the website, revamp the documentation, especially with the permissions. So here it is. If you want to install Hawk, we have a link to the PowerShell gallery. We have it on GitHub here as well. A full-fledged user guide from the overview to the installation and the permission setup. Paul touched on permissions lightly, but the permission setup is absolutely key, of course, right, to run Hawk. You need the right permissions, and it can be a bit confusing. We do list those permissions here. It's probably going to time out because the internet is slow. But we do have a full-fledged tutorial section as well on our site with the videos on how to configure those permissions there. So very important. If that's confusing at all to anybody, go ahead and check out that video or the entire series. And then lastly, we also have the About page here. This is where you can connect with any of us on stage here. We have Paul, which is Top Cyber. We have myself, and then Lorenzo, and some of the other developers too. There's even a support page. The internet's kind of wonky right now, but the support page links to our GitHub as well to submit issues and feature requests. With that, that concludes our presentation and demo, and we'd open the floor up for questions. Sure. The question was, is there a more effective way to get a list of all consent grants for all users as opposed to doing it manually? Was that it? Okay. You have anything on that one?
For the consent grants.
Yeah.
What was it?
More effective than, sorry.
Okay.
Rather than doing a user investigation for every single user.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
There is.
So,
Yeah, there is that one. It's an individual module or function.
yeah. So for every single user, you could take the user inventory if you wanted to, and then create a list, and then pass it into Hawk, and then run that individual function to get all the consent grants there. Yeah. So that's probably the best approach to that. Yep.
I came in late, but Hawk needs access to your tenant.
You need to have, you can talk permissions.
What was the question?
Where does Hawk run? Is it a program
Yeah.
that I run on my command line?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a local application that you can run on your box, but your user account needs to have the appropriate permissions that are identified in the permissions setup page within Enter ID, M365, and then Azure as well. So when Hawk runs, the first time you run it, it's been a minute since I ran it, but the first time you run it, it's gonna ask you to consent to those permissions that are assigned to your user, and then that'll give those permissions to Hawk to run. It does, yep. It's all ran locally on, like, you would download Hawk on your machine, you download PowerShell, install the Hawk module, and then it's all ran locally on your machine.
REST APIs.
No, we don't manage any servers ourselves. We're just reaching out to REST APIs that already exist within the graph, within Exchange Online Services, and we're interacting with the cloud as it exists today. So no servers running. It's just that's one of the big things here. Paul, one of the core contributors, was like, hey, we need to make this as lightweight, as simple as possible for users to stand up, and that was like one of the key components going into this when I got brought into the project, was some of those core tenets and core facets.
Good question.
Does that answer your question? We can talk more afterwards as well if you'd like. All right. All right, I'll let the Microsoft guys talk.
Very good question. This is not a Microsoft actual like sponsored tool. This is a legit open source tool that happened to be. We actually had the disclaimer. We never said it. It is not an official tool. It's not supported. It has no SLA. We use the MIT license, and we have multiple contributors kind of across industry. It's been around for, again, since 2018, and has kind of built a reputation of like importance due to the fact that not everybody can have all like the Splunks and the Oaks and stuff like that.
Right, so if you're a large business, what does Microsoft recommend?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that here on stage.
I can speak to that.
Yeah, but yeah, there's multiple other like solutions, enterprise solutions that depending on the size.
Speak to that real quick. I mean, I'm not a Microsoft employee. I can speak to some of my knowledge. I mean, my initial thoughts would be setting up a log analytics workspace, and you can do that inside of Azure, creating a log analytics workspace. It's a place to kind of send all of your logs, and then from that, utilizing Sentinel as a seam to connect to look at those logs within the analytic workspace. You can set up connectors within Sentinel and your log analytics workspace to connect to the various platforms that we're speaking to here today. And in fact, within the CISA playbook, it talks about how to set up those connectors for both Splunk and for Sentinel, I believe. Yeah. Yep. I'll go ahead and repeat that question. So the gentleman here is mentioning that he works for an incident response company doing M365 investigations. He's currently using the Invictus Extractor Suite, which is a tool quite similar to Hawk, came out about 2 years ago, I believe. However, he has noticed some performance degradations and issues running this in larger environments, and he wants to know if Hawk have we tested Hawk in some of these larger environments? I think you're going to jump in.
Yeah. So this was not much. It'll encounter the same performance issues. That's why we scope it down to investigation and users, and also created some of the new capabilities so you can actually run it in like automated workflows. But there will be some limitations. That's why small and medium businesses are going to be better. Large enterprise, you can pull a lot of the artifacts and telemetry, but you're going to get gaps because of throttling using PowerShell and a lot of other limitations to the unified audit log, which I do recommend. There's some limitations on log pull. So the way we kind of have built the modules, we try to confine the time to ensure that we don't miss those, but it's not guaranteed in a larger environment, because if that shorter time frame, let's say 5 minutes, and you have, let's say 100,000 events, you may drop them. So very targeted for the user. That's why we generally start with tenant pull the configuration, just kind of get a lay of the land of like how many users do we have, and then from there you can do targeted investigations. Again, this is not a highly advised like enterprise tool, but definitely good for, fortunately or unfortunately, a large population of people who use M365 in Azure. Not everybody is, the larger organizations that can use all those high-speed licenses and all of that, all those tools, and actually have the resources to actually operationalize them. We have 2 minutes before we get yanked. Mr. Langtree, because I know your name and I saw you. Go ahead.
Thanks for doxing me. So if you had, you said during the tenant scans that it looks at the admin. If you had other like groups of users you wanted to look at that were high risk, can you set that up, or would you just recommend like creating a list of those users?
You could, yeah. So one of my TTPs back in the olden days when I was kind of doing a lot of IR hunting was I would actually ask the admins like, hey, who do your high value, what I call high value users? Because every time I asked for an asset, I'd get like a router name. And so we would say, hey, what is your high value users? And they'd be like, oh, like so-and-so, CEO, person with finance. So what I would do is I would iterate on those users and then run this tool very quick to kind of get a quick triage of like, okay, well, your high value users who have permissions, probably, get a quick assessment of like potentially yes or no. Great question. Yes, sir.
Is Hawk able to run with like partial permissions? Is it just Exchange or just SharePoint, or does it have to have all permissions?
The question was what permissions related to Hawk do you need to run? If you actually look on the website, there's very minimal permissions. It has like view, certain, I can't remember off the top of my head, but like there's a few Exchange Online permissions, and if you have them, you can run the Exchange Online. So if you don't have the Entra ID permissions, those functions or modules will fail, but you'll be able to pull the Exchange Online Unified Audit Log. It's going to look a little, I don't know, you'll get a little red on your screen, I think, the way we have it configured, but you'll be able to pull the artifacts.
Yeah, and one of the things we tried to do, at least Paul was on the permission side, when all the documentation was really scope this down to the least amount of permissions required. Hawk back in the day, I think it was like global admin, YOLO. Yeah. That was the documentation before, so Paul did a great job at really scoping this down to the bare minimal permissions that are required. Yeah.
We have got the hook. I appreciate the questions.
Thank
Great
you.
to see everybody. Thank you.